What is up, everybody? Welcome to our Week 7 cash game review. I'm your host, TJ Hernandez, the director of DFS at 4for4. As always, with my co host, Matt Savoca. Before we get into everything today, the DFS MVP cash game review is brought to you by SuperDraft Fantasy, the official fantasy partner of Caesars Rewards. DFS MVP listeners get an instant $20 deposit match with your first deposit by using the promo code 4for4. That's the number 4, FOR, the number 4 at registration. Get it now to play the Super 15. It's a game everybody has seen in memes, but nobody could play for cash until now. You'll recognize it as soon as you'll see it, and you'll be able to win money playing it for the first time. Again, use a code 4for4 on the SuperDraft app, and you will get instant $20 deposit match. You can try it out for yourself now, and anyone who deposits and is a new SuperDraft user can enter to win a free NFL jersey. Go to 4for4.com/SuperDraft for those details. Matt, welcome to our wrap-up of Week 7. How was your Sunday, man?
Hey, it was pretty good. Want some of my GPP decisions back, but from a cash standpoint, we're riding pretty well here. Almost as good a week as last week. 57th percentile finish if you see the lineup up on your screen here. Going with Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry turned out to be a huge differentiator. It wasn't how most people went on FanDuel, but ultimately with some solid plays at the wide receiver position, at defense, absolutely no complaint. 12% ROI. Didn't hit in any triple ups or 5X, but still a positive ROI. We'll take that all day.
Yeah, looking like a pretty nice lineup overall, and the chalk overall, like nobody went outside of Cooper Kupp. No one goes completely bonkers, so you didn't have to be perfect in cash games on either side. And Henry coming in surprisingly low on FanDuel. We were talking about it before the show. I thought even at 11K, just the way that FanDuel salary structures work and in that high scoring environment, I thought we would see some more Derrick Henry. But let's get into the spots that you hit on and the spots that you were pretty much locked into no matter what going into the week.
Yeah, so the big inflection point, obviously, are you playing Derrick Henry at his massive 11K salary? And by saying yes, and it is something that I talked about in my article this week, it was kind of begging you with that salary to look elsewhere at running back one. And essentially, the rest of the field did exactly that. And so just by going with Derrick Henry and getting 15 points from that spot, it ended up putting me in a different position, especially pairing that with a premium quarterback like Lamar Jackson. And we talked about on our DFS MVP podcast on Friday why we are prioritizing that QB1, that premium QB1 in our builds this year especially. And then the next thing you'll notice is the game environment that I really stacked up on with Darrell Williams on the other side and Mecole Hardman, who obviously was a value play, but I felt a little bit more comfortable taking that value play and positively correlating it with the running backs I was betting heavily on. So it actually made it an easier decision to go there, not more difficult. And again, something I mentioned on the DFS MVP is really, really liking Chris Godwin this weekend, popping in our breakout receiver model. That almost felt like the biggest lock of the week for me. Him or Fournette or both were pretty much in all of my practice builds before finishing on that. So ultimately, you're not going to get 21 points from a defense. That feels almost lucky in a sense, but I feel pretty good about locking in the Buccaneers crushing all over the place. And even though the Chiefs didn't show up, the Tennessee, if you told me that Tennessee scores 27 points and wins, I'm taking Derrick Henry at 11K almost every single time. So I'm not calling that a whiff either.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually like the way that game went. I liked Henry already just because teams had been running against the Chiefs at a pretty decent rate, which might be counterintuitive because everyone just talks about how you have to score to keep up with them. Obviously, they haven't been playing as well as we're used to. But that was like that's basically for that game flow and everything that Tennessee does. That's pretty much the floor game for Henry, which that really highlights why he's still in consideration at 11K, because his worst game, he's still getting you 15 points. So I think I'm pretty much on par with everything there. And again, Mecole, Derrick Henry, I'm fine in that build. We had a game with almost 58 point over under, and nothing else was above. I don't think anything else closed out at 50 and a half, maybe 51, but still the gap was really big there. So that's fine even in cash games. Once you lock in Derrick Henry, it does kind of like limit a lot of your decision points. I know you're locked in on Godwin. All of the quarterbacks were bunched pretty much together, so there's not like a ton of like super crazy decision points after that. I think your build's going to be kind of obvious with the player pool that you highlighted in your outline, but going to some of them, what were some either some misses or just some like 1v1s or 2v2s that you were struggling with, or just wrestling with, not even struggling with?
Sure. So Dallas Goddard was a fine play.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, a 10 point, was 10.8, 10.5 points. He doesn't kill your lineup by any means, but it's certainly not a have to have it score. You're very excited if you're someone who's betting big on Dallas Goddard going forward, though, because it does look like
Yes.
that role that we expected is going to be there. And if you told me that the Patriots are going to score 54 points on the Jets, I'm probably taking Jacoby Myers most
Yeah.
days too. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that is going to be called a miss or a missed decision point there. He was mispriced based on the amount of opportunity he gets. I will say with Goddard though, in that salary per expected fantasy point metric I mentioned last week, Kyle Pitts was by far number one in that metric. So I was trying to get up to Kyle Pitts, who I believe was $400 more than Dallas Goddard. And in my build all week, it had Pitts, and obviously he had a fantastic game, second among all tight ends, and at a 3.2x value. That would have been awesome to get up to, but I probably would have changed the Buccaneers defense. So
Yeah.
it's kind of win some, lose some. The
For
other
sure.
thing I will mention is Derrick Henry or A.J. Brown was how I was playing the whole week.
Gotcha.
And so if I had gone to A.J. Brown, obviously he has a great game. First of all, I'm thrilled to see it, but it probably changes my entire build, and ultimately it may have made it more chalky. So again, it's sort of with the fact that I played Henry and he doesn't kill my lineup, and I don't know if I mentioned this yet, he was at 5.4% owned
Yeah, that's
in the
crazy.
big double up, which is just kind of nuts. So at that point, having Henry and Lamar Jackson just let me differentiate my lineup and not whiffing on anyone really just kind of propelled me into a 57th percentile finish. We'll take it.
Yeah, the couple questions that I have about that. So once Derrick Henry is locked into your lineup, I mean, it's kind of hard for you to afford Darrell Henderson with the rest of the player pool that you have, right? Like Darrell Henderson is a guy that was in a really good spot, but I mean, it's pretty hard to get 19K in running backs, right? And then kind of to that point as well, what were you doing with the Rams in general, Henderson and Cooper Cup?
Yeah, when you ran the optimizer with my like lock in one
Mhm.
lineups that I was talking about for cash games, all I kept getting was Stafford Cup Woods, Stafford Cup
Yeah.
Higby, and you're not going to be afraid to game stack even in cash
Mhm.
lineups when you have a double touchdown favorite. And boy, did they show us because the game script did get wacky there for a moment. It got Detroit. Hats off to them. That's exactly what you want to see a heavy underdog do. Fake punts, aggressiveness
Yeah.
on offense, and it almost worked through one half of football. And then Cooper Cup proved that he might be on pace for he is on pace for one of the best wide receiver
Yeah.
seasons of all time. So he's the alpha wide receiver one right now. I really can't believe I'm saying that, but it's really the truth. And
Yeah.
beyond that, there was nothing taking me away from them. It just
Sure.
so happened that it did.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you mentioned one of the switches you get off the Buccaneers. So many times these 2v2s that we're looking at, when we're thinking about them as they feel so close because they're basically coin flip situations. A lot of times they end up being true coin flip situations. The difference might be a point or two here or there. Obviously, we remember the ones where we're really off, but I think the vast majority of the time kind of plays out like that, where you're probably not losing too much equity. And the Cup Henderson thing, that's one of those things we've talked about so many times on this show, is that you can have the player pool, you can have guys that you really want, and unless you're literally hitting the lock button on them, sometimes your build just doesn't get you to those guys. So it comes down to what you're prioritizing. talking about one other thing with you mentioned the Patriots, and it reminded me of a couple of things. We did have some news on Sunday. I think the two biggest ones were the Ramondre Stevenson surprise inactive, and then late Saturday, early Sunday, we got Darren Waller possible injury. I don't think like going to any like Renfro or Foster Moreau was a thing on FanDuel. It just doesn't really make sense to go to those types of guys. Did you have any inclinations about putting Damian Harris in when we got the Ramondre news?
That's the one you could see a mile away, right? With
Yeah.
their schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, it just looked like Harris was in line for a huge day.
Mhm.
And then the decision making of the team to have Stevenson be inactive probably told us all we needed to know. Now, I will say we saw 3 running backs be involved, so that does give us a cause for pause. Bolden scored, JJ Taylor was used, but ultimately, we're not expecting 54 points from a Mac Jones led offense, but ultimately, we're going to look at that as a really, really solid spot for Damian Harris. So I talk about the players at the top of the scoring list that don't surprise me. It starts there. Beyond that, not a huge amount of surprises outside of CJ Uzoma hitting huge in the Cincinnati passing game.
Yeah, the Damian Harris one, I think he was cheaper on both FanDuel and DraftKings than guys that he was kind of grouped with. But if you look at the players that and maybe there's a little anchoring here because we were building up some of the players in his salary range all week, and maybe if we know that Stevenson isn't out 6 days before, we end up landing on him a lot more. But you got Leonard Fournette, Josh Jacobs got hurt, but he was a pretty popular cash play. Darrell Williams for $100 cheaper, Swift for $300 more. So it's not like he was in this salary range where he's a slam dunk. If he's $500 less than these guys, then yes, but smack dab in the middle of them, I think it is still kind of close to a coin flip with a lot of these guys. So I don't think it's egregious to not have Damian. I don't think it's one of those spots where we're not reacting to news properly. It just there's only so many guys you could play, right? And if these guys are in our lineups because we think they're good plays. Talk to me just real quickly about the Booker play, because Booker versus Chuba is just like that game. It had running backs where you could see the usage being there, and then like in retrospect, after seeing how the game played out, it's like, yeah, that's kind of how that game should have played out, and I should have knocked those guys down there. So I got some more thoughts on this game on the other side, but what were your thoughts on that game and that group of those two running backs in general?
Well, if I had known that Henry was going to be so underutilized by the field at 5.4%, then I would have just said, hey, I'm playing Booker because he's a chalky running back, and I'm just being chalk with the rest of my lineup, and he fits. And I hate to say that it's that simplistic. And I did get a little bit bailed out by a touchdown here, but I just saw a player, especially with Sterling Shepard, ruled inactive in the warm-up section of before the 1 p.m.s. I just figured, this team has to have somebody touch the ball. And, another thing is I was looking at the betting models that said that they were essentially a 60-40 underdog this week to the Panthers. And I was thinking, 60-40 isn't that different. Like, if this game goes just a little bit different than the field expects, then Booker is going to be on a winning team running back at a severely reduced salary, $5,800 on FanDuel. So I actually think that was one of the easier calls at 13.6 points. Again, the touchdown bails you out, but that was more simplistic for me. I will add, as we finish up this part of my lineup process, that I did have a hard and fast rule to have at least 2 of Godwin, Fournette, and the Buccaneers defense. And I had a rule to have, if I didn't have 2 of Adams, Kupp, or Hill, I wanted 1 of Henry or Jones. Those were my lock rules of the weekend. And we're not going to get it that simple all the time, but if you want what I was throwing into an optimizer to look at things, that's what I had this week.
That makes sense. And going back to Booker, I mean, he was, unlike we talked about with Harris, and I actually forgot about the Sterling Shepard news until just now. He was, I mean, if we look at the guys that we were talking as cash viable, Darrell Williams at 6,700 was kind of the cutoff in that range. And then Booker goes all the way down to 5,800. So you are getting a big discount by playing Booker. We've talked about some of these guys already, and the Foster Moreau was like, he was just weird because he was it was like likely inactive for Waller, but it was a late window, so playing locking Morrow into cash without a contingency plan was a little iffy. But like, what did you see that was working in some of the top lineups? Obviously, like we always say, not the top lineup because those are outliers, but that group of teams that did really, really well.
People who were willing to play DeAndre Swift, just knowing that the Lions had to do something to try to play. He was popping in some of my cash game lineups. I think he was ultimately cash game viable, and he really popped. Obviously, the Buccaneers all over. Tom Brady, Mike Evans stacks. Tom Brady, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin stacks. They were affordable and they went absolutely bananas. Stafford Cup lineups did excellent, obviously, as they continually do. And then you did have some tight end options. There were some people clamoring for Foster Moreau, especially if your 1 p.m.s went poorly. Then you switch to a player. He was a legit contrarian late swap option because then it let you get up to some other premium players that were less popular because from a value perspective, they didn't look as good as other players in their tier. Beyond that, was it a week to have wide receiver in the flex? It kind of looks like you could have done that with, if you look at just sorting the players by value, the wide receivers look a lot better than the running backs here. And I don't know if you could have seen that one like other weeks, but ultimately, one thing I kind of thought of too is this: if I imagine Derrick Henry's name as Christian McCaffrey, would I have any sort of pause about creating my lineup this way? And so with cheap Buccaneers and the ability to fit in players like Cup anyway, I think there were multiple ways to win this week, but just starting with Henry Jackson, it ultimately went fine.
Still a profitable week. It's a nice build. It's really just sticking to our guns and for lack of a better term, trusting the process. So I like the build a lot. I think we've had a couple weeks where on FanDuel, we saw wide receiver work in one of your better lineups. I think if it's close on FanDuel, it's probably almost always going to be a running back lean. I think you need a really, really good reason to get off of a third running back on FanDuel. So I like the 3 running back build. Let's move on over to DraftKings, where I had got a little win streak going. I think this is 3 weeks in a row now. So that's what we call a winning streak. 65th percentile on DK. We see the icicles next to the running backs, but in spite of all of that, still ended up with a pretty good week. Again, just trusting the guys that I thought were the most obvious values and building around that, not trying to pull my hair out over 1v1s or 2v2s. So starting up at the top, we talked about this on the DFS MVP Friday show. We brought up Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson for both sites. I said you can go to Stafford if you want in cash games in my article because he was right between Hurts and Lamar. So if you had some kind of build where you had an extra $300, needed to go down exactly $300 or something, I thought it was fine. But I never really had any inclinations of building Hurts or Lamar. My initial builds were Lamar with 2 cheaper receivers. And then either Cup or Devontae. Once we got the AB news, it was pretty easily Jalen for me because to build with Lamar, I needed 2 cheap receivers, and there was just no way I wasn't playing Chris Godwin. I thought he was the most obvious value on the slate once we got that news. I mean, besides Darrell Henderson, who he was just egregiously mispriced. So I had lock on Henderson, lock on Godwin, and then kind of making my decisions everywhere else because we had bunch of 6K running backs kind of priced together, a few punt options. I just kind of let the lineup generator give me Jalen or Lamar. They were pretty close for me in medium projections, and I think they ended up a point apart in final projections. So even though the salary was different, I didn't care who much I landed on as long as I was getting the value I wanted at other positions. And then the Cardinals defense, they were so cheap relative to their spread on DraftKings. And actually, I don't remember if I said this in the podcast on our podcast or a different podcast, but I was saying I wasn't hitting the lock button on the Cardinals because if I was able to get up to I don't know, a Cup easily, and when I wouldn't be able to without them, I would have been fine not playing the Cardinals for like I don't know, whatever the punt defense was, but I was not I was not going to sacrifice like a Cup or a Devontae for Cardinals. The way that it played out, they worked fine in the lineups, and they did fine. They scored 11 points. They were a 17-point favorite, well below the maximum or the ceiling. So those were the spots where I was like, I'm playing these guys. Luckily, most of my locks work out except for Henderson. I don't think you're ever not playing Henderson at 6,600 in that spot. Like, I don't care, if he scores 9.4 points 5 weeks in a row and this offense is exactly the same, I'm running it out a 6 week in a row and just saying this is good process. So that one was pretty easy for me. Any thoughts on those lock guys?
Yeah, totally. I mean, think about if the Cardinals had scored 2 points at
Yeah,
64% ownership.
yeah.
That means you just need to differentiate yourself with one running back, one wide receiver who scores a touchdown more than your opponents, and you've made up that difference on 2/3 of the field. So ultimately, that is a decision where they were just fundamentally mispriced, allowing you to get to all the other players, that it just makes sense to me. I mean, they're as close to a defense lock button as I can remember on
Yeah.
either of the sites. They were just it literally felt like they should have been 41, not 31.
Oh,
Like
definitely.
someone
Yeah.
forgot 1,000.
Yeah, they should have been 40. That was like the exact number. They should have been as 4,000 or 41. And then like, yeah, he was 80. This is the $100 big double up or massive double up. I don't remember the exact name they call it, but the biggest $100 double up single entry they have. And Henderson was 80% owned. So like, we've talked about this, leaning into those super high owned guys in cash games. Like, just play them, because if they whiff, you don't lose any equity. If they go off and you don't have them, you're never catching the field. So I'm always playing these guys. I did have, even with all of those kind of obvious-ish plays, I did have quite a few decisions to make. One was my player pool, my running back pool. It was, once Henderson was locked in, it was pretty much Chuba, Jamal, and Darrell Williams. Obviously, I either run bad or I'm just super bad by leaving the one guy that has a good game. But even though Henry I thought was cash viable alone, the way I was building and making sure I was getting Godwin and either Cup or Devontae, which was my priority, it was just never going to be a build where I could get to Henry. If you got to Henry, that was fine. I saw a lot of really good lineups that did get to Henry that still kind of ended up with kind of similar scores. I think maybe flexing Godwin or something got you there, but that was my build. And Chuba over Jamal, like I was kind of locked into Darrell Williams just because I obviously don't think KC's going to get blown out, but his usage from what we saw the week before, just was really surprised by that. So I think I was pretty close to a lock button on him. So it came down to Chuba versus Jamal. That game, I mean, Jamal scores on like a 40-yard pass, or was it a 50-yard pass early, and then like he just has his regular. I'm not Jamal. I'm sorry, DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift has his score, and he goes on and has basically what we've seen just from DeAndre Swift all year. My thinking was just like, I'm already on Darrell. I'm kind of thinking about Cup. Do I really want to be game stacking this game? Like, I'm fine stacking the Rams. Do I really want to be game stacking this game that can be a complete blowout? And I know Swift, and I even talked about it in my article, Swift is a guy that gets points in negative game script. Him and Hawkinson do. But I just thought that there was a decent chance that this game goes so bad that even like his negative game script is like not that much different from what I expected from Chuba, who was getting 90% of the work over the last couple of games against a pretty bad Giants run defense that had injuries too. So it was like a last second, which probably in retrospect it should be more DeAndre Swift, but it just is what it is, and I ended up on Chuba, and still again ended up having a good lineup. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was sitting here going, Jamal Agnew, Jamal
Yeah,
Charles,
yeah, 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 yeah.
where? Yeah,
I was
no, but
thinking of Jamal Williams, and I meant DeAndre Swift.
No, but yeah, I understand. And also, they were a favorite in that game. So, you're just talking about a favorite running back, and
The
they were
Panthers.
clearly the Panthers were,
Yeah.
and then just clearly aiming to get him the ball. That game went south in such a crazy way for the Panthers ultimately. So I don't think that's a bad process play at all there.
Sure. After I kind of start filling out my roster with these guys, the two punt decisions that I'm looking at are Ricky Seals-Jones, Rashad Bateman, Tyler Johnson, and then I was like, do I with the Foster Moreau news? I thought it was just close enough where he didn't like, if he would have popped all the way to the top of our model, then I think about it harder. But with the late window there, I didn't think the difference between him and Seals Jones was that huge, and it wasn't going to get me to anyone that I was like dying to get to in my build. So I was fine with Seals Jones. Bateman versus Tyler Johnson was one of my big back and forths. And then after our Sunday morning GPP show with Jordan Vandick, it was just pretty easily Bateman for me. And I thought he might be kind of popular. I mean, he ended up, I think, like 25% in cash. So it wasn't that popular, but popular enough. So those were my big decisions. And then Cup versus Devontae was like where I was really, that was my big, where do I go here? Was really struggling with it. Obviously, Cup was the bigger dollar discount, so I started like late in the process thinking he could end up being in like 30 or 40% of lineups here. So I don't want to miss out on that. And then the last thing that I thought about, and it was actually because we got a question from a subscriber in Discord that asked, is it bad to play Cup and Henderson together in cash? And I actually said to him, no, actually think it's really good because their point concentration is so high between those two players right now that those you're actually kind of mitigating your risk in a game where they're supposed to blow up. Now it can go like this where Henderson gets 9 and Cup gets 41, but I think if we play this out a lot of times, it doesn't really matter if we know they're going to combine for 45 to 50 points. Do we really care how the allocation looks? Like if it goes 25 and 25 down the middle, do we care? No. So when I started thinking about that, I was like, why try to guess if it's Devontae or Cup? Why not just play Cup or Henderson and get all the Rams points either way? So that was my final decision on that. Cup gets me 41. Hendo gets me 9, but I don't care. They combined for 50, and that was kind of my thought process. Ended up working. Wide receiver.
How different do you feel? How different do you feel if Cup scores 25 and Henderson scores 25? Now we're talking about it entirely different. Like they both hit.
Yeah.
Anyway, because you captured both.
Yeah. So that was kind of my thought process. My thought process there. And then I never really had a wide receiver in the flex idea because, like I said, I liked Chuba, DeAndre, and Darrell Williams, and I knew I was already lock buttoning Henderson. I was already lock buttoning Cup and Godwin, so I wasn't like, well, not lock buttoning Cup. He was one of my decisions, but like a high price receiver. So I never really thought about a third wide receiver this week, even though it was fine. I just wanted 2 of those other running backs besides Henderson more. So I think. Again, I saw some lineups where they got up to Henry and ended up having a flex receiver. I think maybe playing a Tyler Johnson or a Mooney with Bateman would have been a fine build for your 4 wide receivers. But overall, pretty happy with this build.
Yeah, and I think
– go ahead.
Yeah, one of the big things that I'm noticing here is the decision point differences that we made. First of all, obviously the pricing and salary differentials from the 2 sites, but ultimately, I made the decision that I felt comfortable game stacking the highest game total game on the slate with players on both sides, even low salary, less probability players like Mecole Hardman, because of the Vegas totals telling me to go that way for both teams. Whereas in your lineup decision points, you chose to opt for a player other than DeAndre Swift because we already saw in the range of outcomes for these heavy underdogs, we saw the Jets this week. We saw the Bears this week. We saw how bad it can go for a team in a game environment like the Lions were.
Yeah.
Now, Swift is a talented player. You could say there are exceptions always to certain rules, but I think the decision-making, the process was correct, that the game environments were too different to choose from, or you had to make a different decision there.
Yeah, I think if they're 8-point dogs, 9-point dogs, I play them with like as 16 or 17-point dogs. I'm like, this thing could just get disgusting. And like that was the decision there. Let's look at some of the big overview stuff again. Like we're getting more knowledge every single week and about teams, about our game, and we're both been having going on little mini winning streaks here. So I think the process is getting better all around. Hopefully the same for the listeners. What surprised you this week from game, again, DFS, fantasy, real football, anything that caught your eye NFL wise?
Well, I think the Chiefs are the most alarming situation here. To score 3 points in a game is something that I just didn't think was
Mm-hmm.
really in the range of outcomes here. So it kind of makes me, it makes me pause about my process related to the Kansas City Chiefs that I haven't done in a couple of years. Beyond that, we got some teams that are in real disarray. I think you're going to mention one of them soon. And then we may have a new, at least serious contender out of the AFC North, the Bengals,
Yeah.
walloping the Ravens. I didn't see that coming either.
Yeah, I was thinking in the middle of that Chiefs game, I was thinking like I was really hyped up for the Bills uh, Chiefs game a couple weeks ago because I was a fan orphan that was adopted by Bills Mafia, so I was like that game is going to might end up deciding home field advantage. Man, now I was thinking like if the Bills have to go to Tennessee for the AFC Championship game, I'm gonna be pissed about that. Like in retrospect, it's the Titans that are gonna have a lot to say about that. Could have a lot to say about that one seed. I'm holding out like one more week that I still think Chiefs get things right. Defense is horrible. They're going to have to win 35 to 30 games to make a run. They can do that. They got to get right spot against the Giants on Monday night next week. If that doesn't happen, then we could I think we could really have some real issues here. On the other side, got bailed out again with Jalen Hurts late points. But man, the Eagles they're really in disarray, and I think that as much as we've loved Jalen as a fantasy asset, the first quarter or third of the season or whatever, they're playing so bad and he's like struggling so much as a passer that like the rumblings about him maybe getting benched. Like I think if another game gets out of hand, we have to start thinking about like, can we play him in cash? Because if they're getting blown out again at halftime, is he going to play the second half? And maybe not even if they dislike him or not, but like, do they even just want to keep him out there in this bad of environment? Everyone's talking about the Justin Fields disaster, but I mean, if the Eagles keep playing as bad as they are, and he can't like keep them close for 3 quarters, what do they do? So I think we're starting to have some risk about him getting pulled at some point if they are in a bad situation. So that'll be an interesting thing to think about if we're considering him as a cash game play going forward. And then this is specific to DraftKings. I've been noticing, we saw it last week with the Ricky Seals-Jones, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews week. A lot of people flexing tight end. I'm seeing it. We got late Foster Moronu, so maybe that's why I saw it again. But we've kind of seen a steady increase in people flexing tight ends in both cash games and GPP. So that's going to be something I kind of have to like chew on that and figure out what it means for our strategies, especially I think probably more so in GPPs if the field's doing that more often. What does that mean for how we should be approaching our builds? But it's something to think about and pay attention to if you're playing on DraftKings. Like I don't know if it's a trendy thing or if it's something that we should actually be paying attention to, but tight end in the flex is growing in popularity. So that's interesting. Again, shouldn't be too much change here going forward, but anything big or overhauls that you have to your process this week?
Yeah, we're really not. We're choosing solid game environments, looking for value plays the same exact way. And we said this on the Friday show, but especially at FanDuel, we're going to look for basically there's a huge linear correlation between salary and value, and so they were signaling to us that Derrick Henry was a really solid way to start your lineup with that high salary option. And there were a couple of value metrics where he really stood out for us in our projections in our player pool. So we're sticking with the value metrics that we have at 4 for 4. Keeping on.
Yeah, the guys at the top of the value report are just consistently performing well in cash games. Not a coincidence that the site with the most accurate projections has the best value plays in DFS. One thing that we talked about head-to-head variance a little bit last week, and Obviously, unless you're playing thousands of head-to-heads, your percentile finish in like a double up or a 50-50 isn't going to perfectly match up with head-to-heads. But I am kind of seeing a steady trend, at least on DraftKings, of the percentile of my double up or 50-50 finishes isn't necessarily matching up with my head-to-head win rate. With my head-to-head win rate being like slightly lower, so like a 65th percentile double up lineup, seeing like 56 or 57% win rate in head-to-heads, and I think probably that makes sense that the double up fields are a little bit softer, because I think you are just going to get more like people that don't pay attention to DFS just see a bigger prize pool, and that shouldn't matter obviously because you're still just trying to double your money, but people are just going to throw lineups into there more often because they I could turn 100 into 200 perfect instead of trying to play $100 in head-to-head. So I think the head-to-head field probably is a little bit sharper than a double up field, and intuitively that makes sense. So maybe allocating like whatever, if you're playing $1,000 in cash each week, allocating a little bigger percentage of that into a double up. So maybe playing like every small field, or not small field, single entry double up, and playing a little less head to head. See how that goes. I mean, it's something I'm thinking about. Like if the field's softer and you need a lower score, sure, it's higher variance because you need to hit the cash line, but I think it might be a long-term EV play. So that's the only big thing I'm thinking about. Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, I know I was sounded all doom and gloom about the Chiefs before, but to be honest, I think they're one of the biggest positive regression candidates on offense. I'll just throw out a stat to end the show on. I was looking at a tweet that showed series success rate, the ability to turn a 4-down set on offense into a first down or a touchdown since 1999. Number one in the entire history since 1999 is the 2021 Kansas City Chiefs. Number 2 right now, the 2007 Patriots. I don't know how that's possible. That includes last week's game. But if you talk about the ability to just get a first down or a touchdown, no one is doing it better than Patrick Mahomes. That just screams positive regression to me.
I like that a lot. And we don't get them on the main slate, so we don't get to take advantage of it against the Giants, but that's all right. I guess we'll just play a bunch of showdown. All right. Thank you guys for checking out the show. As always, if you are here on YouTube watching it, please give us a like on YouTube, follow the 4for4 YouTube channel. Check out our other shows. DFS MVP every Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time. That is our overview of values for the week. Every Saturday, Yahoo DFS with Matt Harmon. That is on the DFS MVP podcast feed, as well as the Yahoo podcast feed. The GPP Last Look, that is on the subscriber-only 4for4 Discord, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Make sure you check out the description below to join our Discord. And please give us a follow on Twitter. 4for4 is at 4for4 Football. Matt is at Draftaholic, and I'm at TJ Hernandez. We'll talk to you guys on Friday.